Hello, everybody joining us. We will get started momentarily. Just give it another minute or two for anyone to come join in uh, for our ranked choice seminar, ballot question 3 in Nevada. What does it mean? What lessons can we take from Maine and Alaska? It's going to be an exciting conversation. We will have a chat on the sidebar. Feel free to put in, any questions you guys might have, or we'll have a short Q&A at the end. This is an exciting conversation, not one that's going to be ending this election cycle. This even if it passes, has to pay past one more time. So it is something we're going to be discussing in our state for at least another year and a half, potentially. So we'll just give it another minute, see if any more individuals join in. Sweet. Saw some more people join in. So I think we'll get this show underway. So Nevadans this year will have a choice before them. Question 3, final 5 ranked choice voting. As right now, the polling shows it's a little bit ahead. And it does kind of touch on a universal feeling. I think there's a lot of discontentment in our state that something might be wrong with our electoral system, its outcome. And there's a lot of calls for structural reforms across the political spectrum of how we deal with this. So ballot question 3, Nevada top 5 ranked choice voting initiative. So what this would do is twofold. The first fold is it would introduce open primaries to our state. This is similar to what California currently does in their jungle primary, except instead of the top 2 individuals proceeding, it would be the top 5. So that means primary voters, regardless of your party affiliation, would be able to vote and select 5 individuals to proceed to a general election, which would be decided by ranked choice voting. And this ranked choice voting, voters would then go to the polls and rank their preference of these 5 from 1 to 5, 1 being their most preferred candidate and 5 their least. And the individual, if anyone breaks over 50%, they win that election outright. If they don't, the least bottom vote getter, whoever was ranked at the bottom for most individuals as their preference, would be eliminated. And the voters who voted for that candidate would then have their votes reallocated to their second choice, and so on until someone breaks 50% and achieves that 50% plus 1 threshold to be elected. This would be for all of our positions in our state, with the exception of local government. So that means governor, statewide constitutional offices, all the way down to controller, as well as our legislature in the state senate and the assembly. This is very interesting subject, and we have 2 great experts from 2 states who've already adopted some version of ranked choice voting. First off, from Alaska is Sarah Montevano. She is the education policy analyst for Alaska Policy Forum and the Northwest Regional Coordinator for Young Voices. She earned a BS in computer science with minors in economics and data science from Montana State University. Her work about ranked choice voting has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Examiner, and the American Spectator. We also are joined by Nick Murray, who currently serves as Director of Policy with the Maine Policy Institute, developing MPI's policy research, analysis, and strategic policy priorities. He is the author of numerous articles and publications, such as the 50 State Emergency Powers Scorecard, Long-Term Growth and Short-Term Gimmicks, Maine's Economy and Governor Mills' Second Biennial Budget, Sticker Shock, Maine's Burdensome Vehicle Inspection Mandate, and COVID Catastrophe, the Consequences of Societal Shutdowns. It is wonderful to be joined with you 2 here today. This is really the subject that is kind of the most interest, I think, across the political spectrum in Nevada. Libertarians, Greens, Democratic Socialists, Democrats, and Republicans have all been talking about this. And if you're a political junkie like I am, this is super interesting to you, and you're super invested to see which way this goes, to see what direction this can have effect on our state. First, I want to kick it off to Nick. Mainly because Maine was the first state to adopt any form of ranked choice voting. So I'd be curious a little bit of the background of how that kind of came about and a little bit of the experience so far for Mainers.
Marcos, thank you so much for the invitation. Glad to be sharing our experience from Maine in ranked choice voting. with you all in Nevada. Ranked choice voting was first on the ballot in Maine in November 2016. It passed 52 to 48. It was a ballot initiative of citizens initiated, kind of similar to what you're seeing there. In May 2017, the state Supreme Court had to issue an advisory opinion regarding the Maine state constitution because our constitution says that the winners are elected by a plurality of votes, not a majority of votes. So that sort of threw a wrench into ranked choice voting, meaning that today ranked choice voting is only in place in Maine for federal races and for primaries because the state constitution had the word plurality. The governor and state legislature are not decided by ranked choice voting, but there were many opportunities to repeal it with our former governor leveraging a little bit of an effort there in the legislature. So the legislature had passed a repeal law. The proponents of ranked choice voting organized another signature gathering campaign to be a people's veto of that. They were successful keeping ranked choice voting in Maine statute. November 2018 was our first statewide race using ranked choice voting, and like I said, it was for the federal race for Congress and not for the state races. In that race, the Republican candidate Bruce Poliquin was ahead in the first round, but after the rounds of tabulation, for the third and fourth place candidates, the Democratic candidate Jarrett Golden ended up winning, and he had about 48% of the total votes. But that goes to the point of what we heard a lot in Maine. It was organized on a state on a citizens initiative, and we heard 4 main promises: 1, that ranked choice voting guarantees a majority winner; 2, that it increases voter participation; 3, that it would increase civility, it would limit negative campaigning; and 4, it would end strategic voting. And unfortunately, all of those promises from proponents didn't materialize, and we're seeing that around the country now. And we have some academic literature that backs those things up as well. And I'm looking forward to getting into those.
Yeah, no, you definitely listed some subjects in there that we will definitely dive into, particularly that report that you guys put out. I think has a lot of great data on there. Sarah, Alaska, our brothers to the far west, the last final frontier. There's a lot of similarities between our state, high numbers of independents in both states, and in particular, the form of ranked choice voting that you guys have is the closest to the one that we have on our ballot currently, except you guys have final 4 because 4 might be a better number than 5, or 5 might be a better number than 4. So what has been the story?
Yeah, so if you were asking me to talk about the special election, that was our first ranked choice voting election. Back in June was the primary, and we just finished voting August 16th. So our partisan primaries were replaced with a jungle primary. What we saw in that special election primary was 48 candidates entering the race. It was an incredibly long ballot, very difficult to read. And so at the end of that, we had 4 candidates who advanced to the ranked choice voting portion. Sarah Palin, former governor, Nick Begich III, a Republican, Al Gross, a nonpartisan, and a Democrat, Mary Peltola. At this point, you may realize that Peltola won eventually. But what was really throwing a wrench in our first election here was Al Gross decided to drop out after these results were tabulated. And due to a quirk in the special election language, the 5th place winner was not allowed to take that 4th place. So there were only 3 candidates in this special election. The way it shook out was Peltola got about 40% of the first choice votes. Palin got, I want to say, 31%, and Begich got 28%. So under the rules of ranked choice voting, he was eliminated first. His second choice votes went about half to Palin and 28% to Peltola. So that was enough to almost close the lead for Palin. But what was really important were about 11,000 ballots ranked just Begich, no one else. And that's what we term an exhausted ballot. It wasn't counted in the final grouping. So Peltola won, and that's how it went. And we're going to basically rerun this race in November with a Libertarian Chris By as the 4th place winner.
Okay, that's definitely something we get into. I know in the chat, We have J.R. Rowley. He actually is a member of the Libertarian Party, and there's been a lot of discussion in the Libertarian Party of does this help benefit them in the long term, maybe getting some presence in legislatures and impacting under Carson City and the Dome. But you just brought up there one of the main cons that are argued against passing these types of reform is the phenomenon of exhausted ballots. And Nick, I know you guys did some wonderful work on this, kind of diving into ballot exhaustion. For those that aren't too aware, you want to start off with explaining what is the phenomenon of exhausted ballots and what has your research shown over at Maine?
Absolutely. So an exhausted ballot under ranked choice voting. So there are three types of ballots that can be removed from the final count. That's an overvote, which is where you'd see a grid in your ranked choice voting ballot. An overvote would be you marking two candidates in the same ranking. And that's the case today. You can have an overvote in a traditional election as well. You can also have undervotes, which somewhat depend on the rules that the Secretary of State will lay out. For instance, our Secretary of State says that if you say rank a first choice ballot, you leave two columns blank, and you say rank your fourth after that, they will consider your ballot an undervote after the first round. They'll stop counting after that second blank column. That can be a different setup depending on the state. So this is where things get a little tricky. Ranked choice voting can tally differently based on the rules that the state sets up. But an exhausted ballot, as Sarah alluded to, is where you rank maybe two out of the four candidates, but the candidates that ended up in the final round, you didn't rank at all. So your ballot is exhausted, meaning that there's nowhere else to put you. And so your ballot, even though you showed up on election day, you cast a legible ballot, you cast a proper ballot. You didn't mark one of the final two choices, so your ballot's removed from the final count, and it's exhausted. And then so when we hear that ranked choice voting delivered a majority winner, that's just looking at that final round tally. Oftentimes, and what we did in Maine Policy Institute, we looked at 96 races, and this research was replicated in a court filing and then by Alaska Policy Forum and other groups after Maine's races. So we looked at 96 races before Maine even used ranked choice voting, and found that over 60% of those races, winner doesn't get a majority of votes, meaning total votes cast. So you'll find this often in ranked choice voting where opponents will say, oh, it ensures you get a majority, but it's only a majority after all of the tabulation and the exhausted ballots are pulled out. And so I think that's a really important thing to look at here. What are the total votes cast, and then how many votes did the winner get in that final round? You'll find more often than not it's less than a majority. And just to drop some data on you guys, Minneapolis and St. Paul have been using ranked choice voting for mayor for years. From 2009 to 2017, about 15% of ballots were exhausted in those mayor's races. So Minneapolis had a much higher exhausted ballot rate than St. Paul, upwards of 20% in some cases.
And again, for the individuals that just joined here recently in the last few minutes, we're with Sarah and Nick, respectively, from Alaska Policy Reform and Maine Policy Institute. And we're on the subject of ranked choice voting and the phenomenon of ballot exhaustion. Nick, this is a great study. I was hoping you might have a link that you can drop in the chat for people who might be interested in reviewing that and seeing themselves kind of more of the numbers, getting into the nitty gritty. And then Sarah, I mean, you mentioned that in this recent special election, I mean, these exhausted ballots became the difference maker. These individuals who either felt so passionate about their person, they only wanted to vote for their person, or they didn't fully grasp the situation, and their votes weren't counted in the long run for this. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'd love to. So we have to remember the fact that Sarah Palin is a very polarizing candidate in Alaska. She did get most of the Republican votes, but only by a slim margin. And so what effectively happened was maybe there's some portion of baggage voters who just didn't feel that they could put her second. There could have been some undervotes too. We don't know the tallies on that because the Division of Elections hasn't given us that information. But there could have been people putting baggage first and someone else fourth. Or there could have just been a lot of confusion or saying, hey, I don't like this system and I'm not going to participate in it. I'm going to vote the way I always have. So it's really hard to tease out exactly what rationale were behind those 11,000 exhausted ballots. But what we can say with confidence is if Palin had picked up about half of those, she would be sitting in Congress today.
And what would you say to someone to say, well, that is how the system was supposed to function, was to keep a polarizing individual like that away from their seat in Congress or a seat in Congress?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting example, but I don't think that in effect it is actually doing that. What I think is more likely, we have to remember that Republicans got 60% of the vote in first choice votes. The Democrat got 40%. And so we have to think about the fact that this is not a representative outcome necessarily. People wanted a Republican 10% more, way more of a majority than the Democrat. And so there were a lot of weird quirks. We had 3 candidates instead of 4, 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat. Maybe that would have shaken out differently if there were 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. We don't know. But that's one of the things I was going to talk about at some point, is just the fact that we had Republican vote splitting here, but it's probably not just because Palin is very polarizing and this is her debut back into Alaska politics.
And, one other thing on that, I mean, I don't want to go on my soapbox here, but I am a huge proponent of multi-party systems where you kind of vote for the party and seats are allocated that way. And I encourage people to kind of look at that. But, this is for either one of you. Why do you believe Maine, Alaska, and Nevada have been selected in these recent pushes?
Well, I'll say because, in Maine, we've seen a lot of efforts from nationally organized and funded groups on all types of issues to focus on Maine. And, we say it a lot in our office. It's because we're a cheap date. $1 million on grassroots advocacy or on TV ads or mail goes pretty far in Maine. And if you want to run a signature gathering campaign, it really ends up just being about money. We don't have many other limitations on signature gathering or submission in terms of geographic distribution. So you can pretty much dump, $500,000 into the greater Portland market and get all of your signatures and get something on the ballot. And I think that's why we see our state as a testing ground.
I would definitely second that. For Alaska, we have maybe 700,000 people total. And that's just voters are way fewer than that. So we have a lot of issues there. Another thing is that just Alaska is so solidly Republican on most issues that you can see ranked choice voting, at least with the funders of this, that they're hoping to split the stronger Republican vote by having multiple Republican candidates and make it a little more difficult to get elected, I think.
Gotcha. And I've kind of seen this kind of in my research as I was digging into this I've had quite a almost bipolar opinion of this. At first, it sounded like a great idea, and I was against it. Then I went back to loving it and hating it. And in general, I mean, what I kind of figured out was that this isn't too much of a new idea. This actually was first pushed in the 1890s and 1920s during the Progressive era, and there was a whole bunch of cities that took this up, and then most of them almost universally repealed them. So what has it been when you guys talk to citizens in your state, voters in your states, and you ask them, now you voted in this ranked choice system, do you prefer it over the old system, or do you miss the old system? Generally, what are you guys hearing on the ground? Start with Sarah.
All right. So the first thing we saw was some really severe confusion. There's a lot of concerns about how the election efforts are being done. And I think I saw a chat question about what kind of education efforts were going on. The main education efforts were coming directly from the Division of Elections, but also Alaskans for Better Elections, which was the group that got ranked choice voting on the ballot initiative. That's how ours was passed. They got the signatures. It passed by about 1%. So they continued to do this education effort. Even with that, there was still a lot of confusion. I think Fair Vote did some exit polling that said, it's really easy and understandable, and a lot of people really liked it. But there's so many people. You could talk to any Alaskan about it and they will have a different opinion. So I think there was so much confusion, and then a lot of confusion about how the tabulation was occurring. I mean, we got on August 16th the first representative of what the first choice votes were, and then it took about 2 weeks to get actual ranked choice voting tabulations, and then it's just a little 2-page PDF. It wasn't showing how the math was being done, and the cast vote record is a recording of all of the ballots, and that's a really incomprehensible format. So I think a lot of people are confused and uncomfortable at just taking the Division of Elections at its word. Just not being able to replicate the math is not good for transparency.
Mm.
Yeah, I think Sarah hit on some really great points there. On the voter side, there's more voter confusion. I found, we heard that anecdotally, but then you can also look in the literature. Jason McDaniel of San Francisco State University. San Francisco had used ranked choice voting for years. They still do, years and years. And he shows that the complexity of the system increases information costs for voters. And so that will lead to decreased participation among specific groups of voters, especially younger voters. He found African Americans, those with lower levels of education, as well as so he found that there were increased disparities in turnout among the groups who are more likely and least likely to vote. So it exacerbates those differences in turnout, is what McDaniel found, related to age and education. But then we also saw in another report, in a case here in Maine from Bruce Poliquin, the congressman who lost the first ranked choice voting race here, he appealed to the federal courts to strike down ranked choice voting. The courts ended up keeping it, but part of that was an expert report that put together some great data. I'm going to drop that link in the chat as well. But that report from a Princeton professor found that in electorates which use ranked choice voting, even with more elections, you still see higher exhausted ballots. And then he still shows those same demographic issues. If there's more non-college educated voters in a particular electorate, you're going to have higher exhausted ballots, as well as if you have a larger number of senior citizens in your electorate, you're going to have higher exhausted ballots. But, straight up, if you make the system more complex, you're going to increase information costs and you're going to increase voter confusion on any level there. If we want a voting system, we should have one that's as simple as possible, makes it as easy as possible to participate. And unfortunately, ranked choice voting has just failed in that criteria.
I saw a few more people join in. Again, we're discussing about ranked choice voting. This is being recorded and will be posted at Nevada Policy. So make sure to go follow us on social media, on Twitter or on Facebook. That'd be Nevada Policy. And, we will make sure everyone has access to the full recording. You guys mentioned a couple interesting things there that I'm very curious about is, who is making up these reform coalitions that are pushing these initiatives? Mainly because when I tend to approach policy analysis, one of my favorite lens to always put things through is that old bootleggers and Baptist kind of point of analysis, right? That we do have the true believers, and true believers will always be there, but there's always bootleggers in every single policy who think they will benefit from this. So I'm curious, who have you seen make up these coalitions in your respective states?
I can start off there. I think it's hard to draw the normal political dividing lines around this, because you see in certain states where Republicans think they might have the advantage, or conservatives might think they have the advantage, that or they have more of the electorate, that they would likely benefit from ranked choice voting. Whereas in a place like Maine and in Massachusetts, where thankfully it was defeated, where more of the electorate is on the left, you see that segment of the electorate winning or being more benefited by ranked choice voting. I think what it does is it strategically it promotes certain blocks of the political spectrum to stack the ballot with their candidates. So you do see those sort of craven political actors who see the system as something that's going to help them in their state. But then you have the folks like Fair Vote, which really believe that this is about re-injecting democracy into the system. That just goes to the point of, this is not ensuring majority ballots. This is not ensuring civil elections. We saw election spending go through the roof in Maine, so it surely didn't slow down that procession. But I think it is tough to draw the traditional political dividing lines around this. I don't like ranked choice voting because it disenfranchises voters. It makes it harder to vote, and it makes it more confusing. And then you lead to a more confusing result in the aftermath, like Sarah mentioned. We're waiting weeks to figure out how they tabulated and to see how the raw vote data came.
Yeah, I have a much less nuanced answer to that. So I think it's really clear from the funding pattern, at least why it was introduced in Alaska and why the reforms were pushed here. Alaskans for Better Elections received about $6.8 million to do this stuff. Two national progressive groups, Unite America and Action Now Initiative, contributed all but $500,000 of it. So I think Democrats, at least in Alaska, think they will benefit from this. And the special election, I think, showed that. But there are a lot of Republicans, too, that want to see more choices, want to say, yeah, like I'd like to have my several different Republican candidates, or the Libertarians that are so excited to be on the ballot that they have a chance of being ranked and get to be a first choice. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing is just the people who want more choices, who are dissatisfied with this two-party system, and who are either looking for several choices within their party or to vote for third parties entirely.
As a libertarian, it's always a struggle. One of those things we're not even going to get into that. And I kind of think I've seen kind of a similar trend here. It seems to be a lot of coalitions that are out of power in their respective parties. I've seen some of the donors so far coming, from former casino executives, realtors, a few building trades. So it's been kind of interesting to kind of see this union kind of coming together from both respective parties. I did see, we kind of hit reviewing some of these questions here on the side. Kind of hit on the Libertarian Party kind of part. Have they seen any other traction in your respective states doing any better on these, or is it still, the duopoly kind of imposes too many restrictions for third parties to be viable? A lot of nods.
No, we have not seen the third parties gain under this, and I think that's a big misnomer about ranked choice voting. Is they say that you're not going to have to waste your vote, you're not going to have to strategically vote, but in reality, ranked choice voting just makes it more strategic. You have to be more strategic as a voter. Not only do you need to understand the candidates and the issues that you're voting for, you need to understand how to rank a new system. You need to understand what your ballot's going to look like and how you can affect change by using that ballot. I think it makes strategic voting that much more complicated. And like I said, we just haven't seen any growth of the parties. There's still like you said, the duopoly still has the higher threshold on signature gathering and all these other ways they keep out third parties. Ranked choice voting is not the silver bullet to bring us into a multi-party system.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that too, because I think the strategic voting point is really, really important. In Alaska, what we may see in November first off, we've got a very strong Republican, a less strong Republican, a Democrat, and a Libertarian. So what we may end up seeing is some voters will say, look, I will rank Palin first on my ballot so that she survives in order to be eliminated by Peltola in the final round. So that's one strategic use of your ballot that might become an issue, because Begich is clearly doing well enough that if he was able to survive to the last round, he might do it. So that's something I think that we need to think about, is that sometimes ranking your candidate higher will actually hurt them, not help them. And that's, I think, something that is unreasonable to expect voters to recognize.
On that point, we do mention that in our report, the Maine policy report. And for the political nerds out there like Marcos and I, ranked choice voting is really fascinating. But I think that's one of the issues, is that it gets into the sort of inside baseball of how politics works. And when we're talking about a voting system, it should be as easy as possible for voters to participate. Like one of the commenters said, 11,000 exhausted ballots out of less than 600,000 registered voters. It's kind of crazy. And you get to this point where 11% of, on average, ballots are exhausted. But then you get into some of these local races where it's 10 or 15%. was that more democratic?
And I mean,
Exactly.
this is all leading to one thing. I mean, Americans are definitely kind of struggling with the two-party system as it's currently kind of leading itself. I think we all kind of agree that we don't think this is going to do much to change the two-party system. But how do you believe we restore confidence in our elections and our institutions, and bring more faith the voters have that they're going to elect the best people possible?
I'm happy to try and take this. That's a huge question. I don't personally necessarily see as many problems with the duopoly because, at least on ballots, voters are using it as a shorthand for, do you agree with my values? So that's something that maybe not is the premise of the question is not what I meant. But there are a few things that I think you should do to restore some confidence in elections and institutions. The first way really is every state division of elections needs to go through and check their voter rolls for dead voters or ineligible voters. That's a particularly difficult problem in Alaska because of the permanent fund dividend. It will automatically register voters if they're eligible. So you can stay on that voter roll without realizing it. And then I think the other thing that I want to mention, we, at least in 2020, got all of our ballots mail in just automatically. If you were on the voter roll, it was just sent to you. Doesn't matter. So I think one thing that needs to happen is requesting absentee ballots needs to continue to be a part of the system. Whether you have an excuse or not, I care a little less. But what needs to happen is not just having all of these ballots sent out into the void where they're in the Postal Service and it's not in anyone's custody. I think that would do a lot to restore some faith in elections.
Yeah, I think in terms of election integrity, definitely keeping the mail-in ballot system um, within the absentee ballot system is important. Having voter ID is important. I don't know where Nevada's at, but we've been trying to fight for that in Maine for a long time, and it's like an 80 or 90% voter approval issue. So it's kind of one of those no-brainers. But in terms of making sure that the system is more reactive to the people, I think that just means that people have to be more involved on that level. It's not, politics doesn't end after the election's over. You have to hold politicians accountable when they're in office, thank them for doing good things, and throw them some barbs if they're doing bad things. And it's an important part of our system. And I'll push back on Marcos. I don't think that we should have a proportional representation system because we have an individualized system here in the United States. We have individuals that stand for office for a particular office, and whoever gets them, if they get more votes than their opponent, then they're in. I think that's a really important part of our system, and it means that we as individuals, as citizens, step up and be a part of that system even after the representatives are elected.
So all I'm hearing is, Sarah, you're going to have to moderate the next discussion, and we're going to engage in
All
the
right, you
topic.
two as panelists next.
You're right.
Well, I mean, I want to thank you both. First off, coordinating this across 3 different time zones to get this all organized. I really want to thank you guys for taking time out to come and speak. But I do want to send it off with, kind of what is your top lesson for us to kind of remember as we head into the ballot? Nevada, we have 19 days to early voting starts. We got 36 days till the election day in general. So what do you think you should send off our fellow Nevadans with? Whoever wants to stab at that first.
I mean, I would say just to be skeptical of what you hear. I mean, you have to take what the proponents are saying and putting out there and actually be willing to challenge and be critical of those. It's so hard to make policy in 30-second TV ads and in 5-minute voter interactions at the door. It's just not a great way to make policy. So when you're dealing with a citizens initiative like this, you really have to dig into what proponents are saying. And I would say look back at some of the resources that were shared here and look at the promises of ranked choice voting proponents with a skeptical eye.
That's an awesome listen, and that's kind of what I was thinking, because you can read anything about the Alaska special election, and you will see unique opinions across the board. What I will say is that you do need to be very careful and think about the unintended consequences of what this could do. It depends, a great deal on the candidates that are there and how interested voters are, and in all these different factors that we've touched on today. So an interesting voting system is not necessarily the one you want.
And with that, I just want to say a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you so much for everyone for joining our webinar today on the discussion of ranked choice voting and lessons from Maine and Alaska. I see some discussion going on in the chat room. I love seeing our interaction back and forth and seeing you guys engaged there. Remember, always be civil with one another, and to remember we all kind of want the same thing, because it's a prosperous Nevada and a prosperous United States. I do want to let you guys know we have some more events coming up. This is the first of many more webinars that we're going to do, and in-person events coming up at Nevada Policy. There's a lot of work to be done in this state, and we have a legislative session just a couple months away. So there's a lot of issues facing our state to chart a better course forward, and we'll find out what happens in 36 days, which might be something that might take longer if we're in a ranked choice voting. So it might be a little longer in a different system. But for now, in 36 days, we'll have some idea of where we're going as a state. So thank you again, Sarah. Thank you so much again, Nick. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys today. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This will be posted online. Thank you.